Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty, and today is Tuesday, April 30th. The NBA playoffs are rolling on, and so are we, as we have a lot of action to get into from last night. Firstly, the Denver Nuggets officially eliminated the Los Angeles Lakers. We're going to be diving into that game and that series as a whole, where the Lakers go from here, and do a little bit of a brief preview on the Nuggets' upcoming series against the Minnesota Timberwolves. We had the Boston Celtics take a 3-1 lead over the Miami Heat, but not without Kristaps Porzingis going down in the second quarter. So we're going to be evaluating, as we're still waiting on some updates on the injury, what this looks like for the Celtics without Porzingis. The Oklahoma City Thunder pulled off their first sweep of the New Orleans Pelicans. This is a young team that has been an incredible turnaround, so we're going to be diving into that. And then finally, I did want to take a little bit of time at the end of the show here to sort of reflect on the ideas surrounding Kevin Durant's legacy. There was a lot said about him yesterday, and I just sort of want to dive into this idea of how we're going to remember him, because I feel like I might stand a little bit from a different perspective as other people, but that is a very fascinating conversation, so we will be diving into all of that. But before we do, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Helps us grow this channel. Also, if you are a live viewer or if you're watching us after the fact, be sure to use the comment section and give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. Let us know if you agree, disagree with myself, and we'll try and address as many comments as possible, make this show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Now, obviously, the biggest story of last night is the Los Angeles Lakers officially being eliminated from the playoffs as they fall to the Denver Nuggets. But yet again, it's just a situation here where the Lakers are really good at playing the Nuggets close. They're not really good at closing out these games against the Nuggets, and this was an absolute thriller. And I know if you're a Lakers fan, you're not feeling good this morning. How could you really? But from a pure basketball enjoyer standpoint, that was a tremendous game that we got last night. And it was, really interesting sort of how this all played out, because of the fact that yesterday when we were on the show, talked about the sort of path that it would take after the Lakers were able to at least stave off elimination when they played over the weekend. On Saturday, they ended up winning at home, and then headed into Game 5, Jamal Murray was listed as questionable. We weren't sure whether or not he would be playing, and that was definitely a key pivotal point there of, is Jamal Murray going to play? If he is, what percent of healthy is he going to be? And he most certainly did play in this one. He was incredible. Not to rip off the Chris Rock, that is, commercial that we get basically every other commercial break. NBA playoffs this way, the commercials have been just terrible from a sort of tangent standpoint that we're not going to dive into. But playoff Jamal is a thing. In the past two postseasons, he's averaged 25.6 points per game, 7.1 assists per game, and 5.4 rebounds per game. Any one of those averages would be a career high for him in a season, and he is just the definition of a playoff riser. Last night, he scored 32 points, including the game winner that sent the Lakers packing to Cancun. He scored 12 points in the fourth quarter, including 9 in the final 4 minutes of the game. He and Austin Reeves were going back and forth there, but ultimately, when Austin Reeves tailed off, there was Jamal Murray able to get it done for the Nuggets. If he wasn't on the injury report headed into this game, you would have had no idea he was dealing with a calf injury. Now, he was a little less mobile to start off the game. Broadcast was pointing out that he was benefiting a lot from his catch and shoot opportunities, but he only continued to look better as the game went on. He hit a step back three over Anthony Davis. He started working himself inside the arc and was hitting some shots off of that left leg as well. And it was just a really encouraging performance from Murray, who he did go down briefly at one point, and there was a little bit of worry, at least from myself, like, oh my God, did something happen? He had just happened to get hit in the face by D'Angelo Russell, and he just continued to roll in this one, which was massively important because Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was dealing with a little bit of an ankle injury, especially in that first half. Reggie Jackson, who was also actually really good in this game as well, I thought, in the minutes that he played. He wasn't great in the series as a whole, and he was also dealing with a foot injury, so there was a lot going on in that backcourt for Denver from a health perspective, and ultimately they all executed, and they end up winning 108-106, knocked the Lakers out of the playoff. And on the note of execution, late in games, I just don't think that there is an offense since really that championship Warriors team, not the 2022 version, but the one with Kevin Durant on the squad, in terms of being able to come up with big shots consistently at that level. They are just on a different level, and they're hard enough to stop when you give them one look per possession. And then you look at the way that these last 2 minutes played out for the Lakers, where they allowed multiple offensive rebounds. Jokic got one and was able to get an easy putback because Anthony Davis had to come out a little bit more to contest a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope pull up in the paint. And then the very next possession, Aaron Gordon just went up over LeBron James to secure an offensive rebound. He maneuvers his way out of the paint. Ball ends up in the hands of Jamal Murray, who knocks down the go-ahead three. The Nuggets were trailing by one at that point. So, really Jamal Murray's injury was the story headed into the game, and he clearly put that to rest. He was amazing, but injuries were definitely still a part of this because of the fact that Anthony Davis went down with a shoulder injury in the third quarter. Now, he was able to play through it, but it was clear that it was affecting him. It was a really weird play where he just collided with Michael Porter Jr. It didn't even seem like it was that hard of a collision, but he fell down to the floor. They had to go to commercial break. He was lying there for a couple minutes. He stuck through it. He was playing the game even still, but he was just absolutely hindered. He was really good in the first half of this game, I thought, but was pretty much a non-factor offensively in the second half because of this. And defensively, it was clear that the Nuggets were trying to hunt him on these possessions where he still had the Jokic matchup himself. And instead of Jokic directly going right at him, what they did instead is they were running a lot of action. It was Jokic as the ball handler running these dribble handoffs to get his other teammates open looks in the mid-range because Anthony Davis was playing this heavy drop coverage. He wasn't trying to exert himself too much beyond the paint. He was hanging back, and the Nuggets were getting some open shots. And then after Jamal Murray got a couple open looks, the Lakers overcommitted to watching him. Murray went back to Jokic. He ended up scoring on one of those possessions in the third quarter. And as we have seen a handful of times throughout this series, it was just sort of a little bit of a story we've already seen, where it was the Lakers leading at halftime, which they actually did in every single game during this 5-game series that they lost. The numbers in terms of time leading versus time trailing are very staggering. Definitely do not indicate what the actual results of this series were. But the Lakers led at halftime in every single one of these games. And in the third quarter, things typically shifted. It does feel like specifically it was that stretch at the end of these third quarters where Anthony Davis goes to the bench and Jokic stays in, and he just starts to really get himself going. He isn't looking to score quite as much in the first half, but he knows that when the time is there for him to attack, he does, going at Rui Hachimura, and it didn't help that, of course, Anthony Davis was dealing with these injuries. So Jokic ends up finishing this game with 25 points, 20 rebounds, and 9 assists. This wasn't even his best game. He was actually really struggling with turnovers in the first half, had 5 alone in the first, had another 2 for a total of 7 throughout this game. And I saw some people on Twitter talking about how Jokic was carried in this series. I definitely don't think that's fair. Now, some massive performances from Jamal Murray, especially in some late game spots there. Michael Porter Jr. was unbelievable in this series, averaged 22.8 points per game on 55-49% shooting splits. Crazy numbers from a third option, but Jokic is the engine that makes this whole operation run, and without him, it really isn't possible to the same level. Also, keep in mind the fact that Jamal Murray, even when he hit that game winner in Game 2, he struggled for about 80% of the game, and he was just able to come up in the big moments, but it's because of the fact that Jokic keeps this team alive that I just refuse to believe he was... His numbers are one thing, too. It's not even like his impact goes beyond the stat sheet, but people are trying to argue it the other way, that his stats are actually a little bit inflated. I just don't see that as the case whatsoever. I think he is the best player in the NBA, and he helped lead the Nuggets to victory yet again in this situation. All of that action that a lot of the time when Murray gets his looks comes off of Jokic, either, again, in those dribble handoffs or the pick and roll game. Murray, when he hit his game winner, it was using a Jokic screen. So, again, the Nuggets are a very good team. That doesn't mean that anytime players have good teammates that they're carried. I hate some of the basketball discourse that sometimes we see online, but maybe I just pay more attention to it than I personally should. But on the Lakers end of this, I thought that LeBron was really good in this game again. It is unfortunate. I definitely don't necessarily feel bad for LeBron necessarily like some other people do. I mean, it's just sort of the reality of life. We've seen LeBron be able to put on his superhero cape and muscle his teams into these incredible playoff runs. And it's been a lot of fun to watch, even if, at times I haven't been the biggest fan of LeBron just because of being from Boston. But at the same time, if you're just appreciating greatness, it's hard not to with LeBron in his career. But the reality is, Father Time eventually catches up. And LeBron is still incredible. And I thought he was really good in this series for the most part. In this game, especially when Anthony Davis was dealing with this injury, he sort of became the aggressor. And, Anthony Davis, even when he was in the game, he was sort of just standing there in the corner at one point with his arm just dangling dead. And I feel like in general here, LeBron was just, he was looking to be more of the alpha in this situation. He pulled Jokic out to the perimeter a handful of times, and the Nuggets were just going all out on guarding LeBron himself, which was clearly the right decision. And, again, I don't feel bad for a player that has already won 4 championships and is, undoubtedly one of the top 2 players all time, but his team wasn't good enough. And you saw there was an instance in that third quarter where LeBron was trying to run a pick and roll with Jackson Hayes, and the Nuggets just entirely sold out to guard him. It looked like Hayes was very open in the paint, but LeBron just didn't necessarily... granted, he didn't have the angle either because of the trap that the Nuggets threw at him, but it just seemed like there was also a little bit of a lack of trust from LeBron to Hayes in terms of, firing in that type of a pass. But LeBron finishes this game with 30 points, 11 assists, 9 rebounds. He did decline to answer questions about his Lakers' future after the game, so that is going to be a storyline going into this summer for sure. Seems like, though, regardless of what LeBron's future looks like from a personal perspective, that this is the end of the Darvin Ham era in Los Angeles. Seemed like he was pretty aware of it after the game. Said it's been a hell of a year. It's been a hell of 2 years sitting in this seat. Repeated that quote a couple times. And it was a really tough look for him, in my eyes, of him trying to blame injuries for the reason why they didn't have this postseason success because of the fact that, for the most part, they were dealing with some injuries. Gabe Vincent was out for a lot of the years. That was one of their off-season signings. Jared Vanderbilt ended up missing most of the second half of the season when he was injured, but it was the most games LeBron and Anthony Davis have played respectively since joining the Lakers. It was the healthiest season of Anthony Davis's entire career. Rui Hachimura played the most games in his career. D'Angelo Russell played the most games he has since 2019. And I just feel like saying that it's on injuries is such an excuse-making move from Darvin Ham. And I feel like deep down he probably knows to some degree that he was outcoached. And the team that he's faced up against in the playoffs where the Lakers have lost, this Denver Nuggets team, is definitely better. And, I'm not saying necessarily that there is any sort of a coach that was out there that would have been able to pull off this type of an upset. But for Ham, it just has not been a pretty scene for him for a long time now. A lot of Lakers fans have been upset with him. Let me know in the comment section how you feel about whether or not Ham is being a little bit of a scapegoat. I feel like at times the LeBron James head coaches have been a little bit more on that scapegoat side, but I don't know if Ham necessarily has what it takes to, at least yet be a championship level coach. And I thought that it was really interesting how in this game as well, the fact that during this third quarter stretch where the Nuggets are running, Ham isn't using any timeouts. He's sort of just letting Anthony Davis be out there on the floor, clearly in pain, and that's what a lot of fans were upset about. And then when it comes to the fourth quarter, after Jamal Murray hits his game-winning shot with 3 seconds left, somehow the Lakers still don't have a timeout. So again, there's a lot more that goes on sort of behind the scenes in these situations that the average fan isn't really aware of in terms of how these teams operate. But I do feel like Darvin Ham is going to be seeing his way out. Bleacher Report and The Athletic put out an article that is what's expected. So we will see on that. Not totally sure where the Lakers go from here. They're going to be needing a new coach. They are going to need upgrades at both the D'Angelo Russell and Rui Hachimura positions. I like Hachimura, but at the same time, this was a really bad series for him. It's obviously never an easy ask to be able to guard Jokic, but he was, and again, not easy whatsoever because of how good Jokic is in the post, but he was kind of a traffic cone out there, and it's not like he was paying off any dividends on the offensive side either. If you're not playing offense, you're not playing defense, you're not really doing anything for the team. So it seems like they're going to need to make some changes there. The Athletic put out a report saying that the Lakers are open to giving him a 3-year, $164 million max contract. Does LeBron want to commit himself that much in the long term? Obviously, playing with his son is a top priority. I also think that winning another ring is still very much up there in terms of an importance to him. After seeing the way that Denver has been able to handle the Lakers in the playoffs the past couple of years, does he feel like he can still win there? That's still sort of to be seen. Other question is, are we going to see this level of Anthony Davis again? Hopefully, because I thought that this season was really fun seeing him sort of reach those heights that we were expecting when they first sort of paired up LeBron and AD in Los Angeles, having this whole passing of the torch mindset, and ultimately not really sure. This is, like I mentioned before, the healthiest season we've ever seen from him, and he was unbelievable. I'm not totally sure about it, so the Lakers could sort of go a couple different directions with this, but it does depend ultimately on what LeBron James wants to do, so we will see with that. The Denver Nuggets, though, are now advancing to face the Timberwolves in the second round, which I would say that the winner of that series is likely going to the NBA Finals. No disrespect to the Thunder, Mavericks, or Clippers, but I think that these are the two best teams in the West, and this is a little bit of a de facto conference finals. Should be a ton of fun. We're going to talk more about the series later in this week for sure, but just some quick notes on it. It's going to be tipping off on Saturday. We should be in for a great one with this. The two teams played in the playoffs last year, but this is very much a different version of the Timberwolves team that lost 4-1 last season. You have much better cohesion. The chemistry, especially with Rudy Gobert, is much improved. The Towns-Gobert dynamic from a playing standpoint is much better now. It seems like Karl Anthony Towns has turned a corner from a maturity standpoint, and Anthony Edwards, of course, is just on this different level as things currently stand. Was on a heater to end off that Phoenix series. Granted, Suns were definitely a mess towards the end. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show as well. But the Timberwolves have the best defense in the NBA, and they probably have the most capable individual defender in Rudy Gobert in terms of trying to limit Nikola Jokic at least to whatever level you can. So again, going to talk about this series more later in the week, but as things currently stand, I'm going to lean with the Nuggets. I feel like I'm probably going to have a very hard time picking against the Nuggets in any individual round. Kind of gives me a similar Chiefs vibe, even though I did actually have the Chiefs losing to the Ravens, but that was so long ago, we don't even need to talk about that. But the Nuggets are currently minus 215 favorites to win the series, according to DraftKings. The Timberwolves are plus 180. Again, I think that it's going to be the Nuggets because of the fact that they have the experience. There's this extremely well-oiled machine. What the Timberwolves really benefited from was they are an excellent defense in terms of guarding isolation possessions, and that's what makes them so strong. But the Nuggets obviously move the ball around just as well as anybody else in the league, and it's going to definitely be more of a difficult test from that perspective. Can the Timberwolves offense match that? Now, also, something worth noting is the fact that the Nuggets didn't even shoot that well from three in this series. They're actually on the lower end in terms of threes made per game out of the teams in the NBA. So if the Timberwolves can get hot, then maybe that's a way they could potentially make up some type of ground. But again, I'm going to lean Nuggets as things currently stand. Let me know what your predictions for that series are. I'm sure probably on Friday, we're going to be diving more into the second round of playoff series. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break of the show. And when we come back on the other end, we're going to be diving into the Celtics Heat game that took place last night and the injury that occurred to one of the most important Celtics players on the team. So we will dive into that right after the break. Stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some moose shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Along with the Nuggets claiming a series win over the Lakers last night, we had multiple other NBA games take place that we have to get into here. Next up, we have the Boston Celtics, who defeated the Heat to go up 3-1 in the series, but Kristaps Porzingis was hurt in the process, which ultimately becomes just about the biggest story of this game. But before we get into that, on this game. And just remember, for our live viewers, use the comment section to give us your thoughts. We'll try and address as many comments as possible. But this was a little bit of a weird game where the Celtics led from the jump all the way through the end of the game, but it didn't feel like maybe their most dominant performance. They weren't super convincing. Both Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown really weren't great in this game. They combined for 37 points on 12 of 32 from the field. Just feels like Tatum sometimes refuses to work himself inside and get some actual good looks. It takes a certain level of desperation, it feels like, almost, from the Celtics offense, where then Tatum actually tries to be an interior presence, but until then he just relies on perimeter shooting, on difficult shots, and he's, good enough at making some of these shots that ultimately his numbers aren't terrible, but he could be sort of garnering that level of excitement that the national media has for Anthony Edwards right now if Tatum, again, just seemed like he had that a little bit more of that killer instinct. Now, if you're talking who's the better player, Tatum, Edwards right now, I don't really want to get into that debate, but I think I would have a hard time going with Edwards over Tatum, but again, that's not the point of this segment here. But he was sort of settling for all of these difficult shots. You had Jaylen Brown, who was struggling at the rim. He was turning the ball over. He did so 6 times. But the reason why the Celtics were able to jump out to this massive lead was because of the fact that Derek White had a career game, showed up for them big time, scored 38 points, 15 of 26 from the field, 8 of 15 from 3, both career highs in points and shot attempts. And from the jump, it was clear that he had this going for him. Scored 16 points in the first quarter. He was hitting these fall-away threes. It was a ridiculous performance from him. He also still is so impactful on that defensive him and Drew Holiday both, specifically in transition. They just give you that two-way effort that is on a different level. And for Miami, they are clearly just very hindered by all of these injuries that they are dealing with, and as a result, they don't have the offensive firepower to keep up with the Celtics, and their offense was among one of the bottom units anyways during the regular season. They were in that bottom 10, that bottom third of the league. They were 21st in offensive rating. Plus, you take out Terry Rozier, you take out Jimmy Butler, even Josh Richardson. It's just not necessarily the personnel that can get it done in a moment like this, trying to face odds like they have against the Boston Celtics, who were a wagon during the regular season at least. And, they were getting some good looks last night too, but they just couldn't hit, which sort of further proved that the shooting from Game 2, which they stole from the Celtics, was a little bit of an anomaly. But like I alluded to, the story of this game was Kristaps Porzingis going down with an injury in the second quarter. He was dribbling around the perimeter, took a couple hard steps, and ended up pulling up staggering. Looked like it was his right calf specifically that was bothering him. He ended up leaving the game, limping his way to the locker room, and he did not return. He's supposed to get imaging done today, so we'll keep you updated when we get some more news on it. Feels like it's taking a little while. Maybe this is just the anxiety of me, of a Celtics fan, wanting to know the results, but at the time of recording this, it is 2:30 Eastern. We still don't have anything just yet, but we will definitely be sure to keep you updated as we get them in real time. But what we do know is it was labeled as calf tightness last night, which ultimately doesn't really tell us much. Organizations typically try and downplay the injury as much as possible on the earlier side, just to sort of save face. Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN did report that they believe he avoided an Achilles injury, which is, of course, great news, a big-time positive. Achilles is the worst-case scenario, so assuming that they avoided that is definitely good news, but it doesn't mean that this still couldn't be serious. A calf strain is definitely still possible, and that is the injury we see Giannis currently dealing with for the Milwaukee Bucks. It's kept him out since early April. It's been just under 3 weeks officially since he has been out for the Bucks, and it doesn't seem like he's going to be able to return really for Milwaukee unless something a little miraculous happens here and they are able to turn their series around and seem like they have more of a chance that is worth risking Giannis going back out there and potentially making things worse. So it has, like I mentioned, it's been 3 weeks for Giannis here. For the Celtics, the conference finals would be starting in just about 3 weeks, and the finals in just about 5 weeks in terms of a timetable moving forward here. Again, we don't know what exactly it is just yet, but if it is a calf strain, that is sort of the timetable that we're looking at. And assuming that this does not take a turn for the worse and the reporting about his Achilles being okay, as long as that's accurate, he should possibly be back in the next month or so. So we will see how that all plays out. In my eyes, the Celtics are capable of finishing off the Heat in this series, and it's not like he's even necessarily been tremendous in this series from the start. I thought that he was really impactful in Game 1. Thought he had a nice Game 3, but Game 2, he was really bad. That was the 1 of 9 shooting performance. I thought early in this game, there was a frustration from me about him just not actually attacking inside and settling for these sort of difficult jump shots, which I just talked about Tatum. It is a little bit of the identity of the Celtics team at times. But that being said, feel like they should be able to close off the Heat, and then I think they should be able to beat the winner of the Cavs Magic series in the second round as well. The Eastern Conference Finals is where things would get a little more contested. We will have to see. That will likely be against the New York Knicks, who are one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the league, of course, and can be very physical. So Porzingis' size could definitely be much needed in a series like that. But we will see. The Celtics have played 25 games without Porzingis up to this point this year, and they are 21-4. So this is an organization that is able to have success without one of their stars being available. But in order to continue out that success, their other stars have to step up. And it hasn't really felt like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown have been at that level that we know they can play at. It's a great luxury for them that they are as deep as they are and very well rounded. But if you look sort of in the Western Conference, we just talked about the Lakers. If LeBron and or Anthony Davis doesn't show up to a game, they have pretty much no chance of winning, especially when you're playing a playoff team such as the Denver Nuggets. And the Celtics were able to have success during the regular season without Porzingis, but it is, of course, a different animal when the playoffs come around. I think that Tatum and Brown just flat out have to be better. And we have seen the way that the Heat have given the Celtics problems defensively in the past 2 postseasons, and specifically those matchups of Tatum and Brown. So, it feels like this is possibly the most difficult it will get from a schematic standpoint, but at the same time, I do feel like the Magic are a very good defense, obviously top 3 in terms of defensive rating. They've been tremendous in this series against Cleveland up to this point, and I feel like that's going to be no walk in the park for them either. The Magic also sort of, especially if you look at last year, were able to give the Celtics a lot of problems from a regular season standpoint. The Magic, again, we'll see if they even come out of their first round series against the Cavs. It's currently knotted up at 2-2, but I do think that the Celtics should be able to make the Eastern Conference Finals. But again, gets a little hairier from there. But other thoughts on this game, I really didn't feel like the Celtics applied the same level of pressure on Miami's offense that they did in Game 3. They gave their ball handlers a little bit more space. Seemed like they were maybe trying to clamp down on Hero, the playmaker, a little bit more. Clearly, they weren't shaken by the shooting percentages in game 2, where the Heat were still getting a lot of open shots, but they weren't hitting. They were just 9 of 33. Like I said, at game 2, they feel was at least something sort of law of averages. They can't do that on a regular basis, and last night at least that proved to be right. And I also feel like we're seeing a level of maturity from the Celtics team in terms of being able to sort of understand opposing teams' defenses and try and work, I wouldn't say mismatches, because the Celtics in this series also have been looking for individual player mismatches, probably a little bit too much, but the zone gave them absolute nightmares last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, and it feels like this season they've been able to handle that much better, in large part due to not just Porzingis, although he was definitely important for that, but because of Drew Holiday and Derek White, who, like I mentioned, they were both good in this game. I thought that last year in the playoffs, we did see Marcus Smart be able to take advantage of certain instances by getting inside, and here were Holiday and White consistently getting to the paint. The back-to-back dunks from Derek White were unbelievable. In that third quarter, I believe it was. That was crazy, but Holiday was looking to get himself into the paint early, and he was having success there. Derek White as well. But, Tatum and Brown just draw so much attention themselves that they have these other very capable guards now, that not that Marcus Smart wasn't capable, but he was just sort of, he did his own thing for a lot of it, and I loved Marcus Smart as a Celtics fan, but at the same time with him, he sort of wanted to play his game as opposed to being a little bit more of a supplemental piece, it felt like, in Tatum and Brown's game. That was at least sort of the vibe that I got personally, but Holiday had himself a nice little bounce back game, at least offensively, from games 3 to 4. Now, I thought that he was tremendous on defense in game 3, so it's not like he was bad, but just from a scoring perspective, he only had 3 in that game, and this time he bounces back with 11. But another note here I had is the fact that the Celtics had a 20-point lead in the fourth quarter, and, it was going to take a Dean Wade type comeback there from one of their role players to get red hot and end up pulling off this sort of miraculous comeback. But I did still feel like the Celtics were definitely gettable in that final quarter, where they were just kind of doing some stupid tendencies that we've seen from them in the past. They were doing stupid lazy fouls. They were turning the ball over. Jaylen Brown missed the hoop at the rim a couple times, and their offense just looked so much more disjointed than it does, through the regular course of the game, where they're trying to slow it down, they're trying to hunt these individual mismatches as opposed to just playing their game and actually moving the ball around. So we know the Celtics have been a very good regular season team and everything, and for me, it's just really hard to put some of these late game situations out of my head where we've seen it in the past that they aren't able to convert in big moments, and I think that they're fully capable of it, but they do sort of have to, on the biggest stage, prove that they are sort of past those bad tendencies that they have. And then final note here I have is, I thought that the Van Gundy take on that Tatum Adebayo play in the fourth quarter was really weird, where if you didn't see it in the fourth quarter, the whistle was blown after Patty Mills picked up a defensive foul trying to run through a screen. Jason Tatum, put up a practice shot, as most players in the NBA do in those instances, and Bam closed out on him, shoved him a little bit in that midsection, and ended up getting his feet in Tatum's landing area, and Tatum rolled his ankle a little bit, and the refs then reviewed the play, eventually called it a flagrant, but Van Gundy spent 5 minutes just entirely blaming Tatum and saying, oh, well, what was Bam supposed to do? Let Tatum get a free shot? And I don't know, what's he supposed to do? You can put a hand up, but do you need to sort of put your hands physically on him and get up in his space like that to, potentially injure him. It was reckless by definition in my eyes, and the way that Van Gundy was sort of justifying it made it seem like, oh, well, because it's after the whistle, anything goes. But that just doesn't make sense to me. And it was, I wouldn't say hostile necessarily. I don't think that Bam had the intent of injuring Tatum. But again, to this idea of, oh, well, it's after the whistle, so, why would that be anything? I don't know. If you throw a punch after the whistle, and I understand there's a massive difference between that and necessarily what Bam did, but it's still a reckless play after the whistle. And Van Gundy, he was just very intent on the fact that, that was fully on Tatum, and it was just a little bit ridiculous to me, but whatever. At the end of the day, Tatum was fine. It's not a big deal. It was just something that I thought was funny and also really annoying at the same time, because even sort of taking away my personal investment into that situation as a Celtics fan, I feel like to any degree, if the roles were reversed and it was Tatum getting under Bam's landing spare area like that, I feel like it was just an unnecessary play, and the way that Van Gundy was, really going after Tatum in that situation was just strange to me. But anyways, the Celtics take a 3-1 series lead. Even without Porzingis, they should be able to wrap this one up in the next couple games, but we will likely find out about the Porzingis situation later today. Still waiting on anything, really. So if we get any news during the show, we will tell you then. If not, we will be probably putting out a YouTube short later this afternoon with the update as well, so stay tuned for that. But on that note, we are going to be taking our second break of the show, and when we come back, we're going to be diving into the Oklahoma City Thunder's sweep of the New Orleans Pelicans. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are now moving on to the final game from last night, where we saw the Oklahoma City Thunder pull off, you can call it a comeback, I suppose, against the New Orleans Pelicans last night, where the Pelicans had a 5-point lead late in this game, but their execution down the stretch just was not good enough. Josh Giddey actually was sort of the unsung hero for the Thunder, where he was making some big plays. He knocked down a handful of threes, including the go-ahead in that fourth quarter. He had a big steal as I believe it was Herb Jones driving, and sort of the nifty little footwork where he was out of bounds. He saw the ball coming towards him. He sort of hopped back inbounds, did a little Mike Jackson Thriller move where he was up on his toes, and then got the pass up court that ended up leading to a 3 on the other end, I believe, for the Thunder in that situation. But this was a series where felt like the Pelicans had at least a puncher's chance to make this something. Obviously, they didn't have Zion Williamson, which made them, borderline impossible to actually pick, but Game 1 was a close one, and it seemed like they had, again, at least a chance to potentially make this a game. It took some late-game Shai Gilgeous-Alexander heroics in that Game 1 to end up pulling away that win. They won 94-92 there. And like that game was low scoring, this game was as well. And those sort of rock fights felt like the types of games where the Pelicans could take advantage of, is throwing the Thunder, that is, off of their game offensively and take advantage from there. But as we saw throughout this series, there was just not enough shot makers and not a real offense to take place in this type of a situation. And just a really brutal series for Brandon Ingram as a whole, where I feel like there's a good chance we could potentially see Brandon Ingram maybe on the move this offseason. I'm not saying where to yet, but for the Pelicans, it feels like they're sort of circling in on being legitimately competitive in this Western Conference, assuming that Zion Williamson is fully healthy. I feel like last offseason there was a little bit of a debate of who would you rather build around between Brandon Ingram and Zion. I like Brandon Ingram, and maybe it's unfair to, look at this particular series because he missed much of the end of the regular season with an injury. Then he comes back and just never really looked like he was 100%. And added to the fact that then he comes into this Oklahoma City series and he has to go up against what should be All-NBA defender Lou Dort, who was absolutely phenomenal for the Thunder in this series. Held Brandon Ingram to just 14.3 points per game on under 25% shooting splits. He was just really nowhere to be found in this game. And in this series as a whole, it's not like CJ McCollum was great necessarily either, but he at least put together a solid game last night, and they just needed a second go-to scorer, and Brandon Ingram was not that, unfortunately. So the Pelicans end up falling in this one, 97-89. Again, it felt like a game that, I wouldn't even say necessarily it was a pride moment for them, because without Zion, they are clearly not the same team, and it just, I feel like they were much less talented than this Oklahoma City Thunder team, who we're going to be getting into here, is way more postseason ready than a lot of people considered. I myself said that. Now, I had them beating the Pelicans. I just worry about the Thunder when it comes to playing either of the top two teams in the West, in my eyes, in the Nuggets and Timberwolves, in terms of being able to manage size. Jonas Valanciunas wasn't necessarily... Jonas Valanciunas is a good pro, just as a whole. He did a really good job on the glass in this series, backed down Chet a handful of times and got his, but ultimately it's just not efficient offense necessarily, and Chet is a very solid defender that he's going to get his in a lot of these instances. Anytime these other players are trying to... I feel like he's especially great at defending the rim, sort of as that help side defender, and sort of coming in from the backside and making plays like that, but... I think that it's going to be a much different story when they have to face a Karl Anthony Towns or a Nikola Jokic on the other side of the bracket in the Western Conference. But anyways, for the Thunder, I thought that this was very encouraging to see. Now, we sort of, at least I personally, don't want to speak for everybody, I said that this is probably the year before the year for them, where they're now they've arrived. They haven't necessarily had their hearts broken to some degree when it comes to postseason play, which seems like a lot of times that needs to happen in order for a team to take that next step. And that being said, if the heartbreak's going to come a little bit later, you're going to take all of the success you can possibly get. And I think there's going to be a great chance that they make the conference finals. As things currently stand, they're going to face the winner of the Mavericks-Clippers series. That series is knotted up at 2-2. We're not going to get the official result of that possibly for a handful of days now. But I do think they're going to have a very good chance. Again, I cannot understate how phenomenal Lou Dort was from a defensive perspective. And this Thunder team as a whole, I just think they play such a beautiful brand of basketball where, they have their go-to guys that can get them buckets. It's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams. Jalen Williams was also terrific in this game. 24 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 9 of 17 from the field. His downhill scoring is just so impressive on these drives. But for the Thunder, generally, everybody can shoot for them. They have so much spacing, one of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA. Everybody is switchable from a defensive perspective, including their, top 2 offensive scorers. They're both two-way guys. And then you have other players come off the bench where different specialists. I think that Cason Wallace has had an unbelievable rookie season. Hasn't necessarily been talked about like that, but some of the defensive possessions he has had in this early going for OKC, obviously stopping CJ McCollum on the final possession of game 1. There was an instance later in this game where he stripped Brandon Ingram just straight up. Ingram thought he had a matchup. Finally, I'm off of Lou Dort, out of the torture chamber, and Cason Wallace just stripped down on him. Ball ended up with Isaiah Joe, who ran the court and got 2 on the other side. But Isaiah Joe, another player, really impressive off of the bench. Aaron Wiggins is another one that I really like. He struggled a little bit from an efficiency standpoint last night. But the Thunder are, they're a deep team. Now, in terms of depth, the big man position is still something that I feel like is going to be a little bit of a wake-up call for them this postseason. I don't think they're going to be able to deal with the size. Even when you look at, the way that we've seen the first round play out a little bit at times, Ivica Zubac, the way that he dominated the offensive glass, especially in game 1, he can be an underrated skilled big man. You have a combination of guys in Dallas, from Derek Lively and with Daniel Gafford, that can be sort of paint beasts as well. Now, I'm not saying that Chet can't hold his own in these matchups, because Chet is, again, a very promising young center. I'm just saying that it's not going to be easy for him either in the post, and that's just sort of the warm-up for one of the 2 post scorers that they would be getting in the Western Conference Finals that are much more, hands-on guys from an offensive creation standpoint than Chet and the Thunder are going to see in game 2, in series 2, in round 2 is what I'm trying to say. But, I feel like for the Thunder here, you can't help but feel good for them. There are questions in terms of which guys are going to be the future building blocks. They have a lot of these players that are going to be eligible for contract extensions at the same time. Now, the way that this all works out, and especially under this new CBA, the fact that they have all this draft capital in the near future, they could easily go over that second luxury tax, and they wouldn't necessarily have to make all too many other transactions other than just keep swinging. They've been a great drafting team in recent years. Just continue to, take your swings in the draft. You already have the core nucleus of what you need. But it is an interesting conversation when you know that you're going to be playing Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You're going to be paying the Santa Clara Jalen Williams. Chet Holmgren is a lock to be making money for you. Where do you go from there? Because Josh Giddey, he was very good from a three-point perspective last night, again, especially in the fourth quarter. And I do want to see what his catch-and-shoot numbers are on the season as a whole. Giddey is not scared to shoot. And I know that that's obviously not his strong suit, and it feels like a lot of teams are fully willing to sort of put up with Josh Giddey trying to take those types of looks. But at the same time, as long as you're actually shooting those looks and you can start hitting some maybe, and at least, keep the opposing defense honest, it's a weapon to have. And, again, I'm not sure. I'm looking this up here on the fly, so his catch and shoot numbers could be bad. And, that would sort of put an end to my point in this situation. But again, I just feel like generally, Giddey is somebody who his importance seemed like it sort of fell off. Obviously, he had the off-the-court issues that really sort of dampened his public reputation, along with the fact that he just hasn't been quite as good during this season now that he has taken a little bit more of a back seat from an offensive creation standpoint. But like I said, his numbers are okay from a three-point shooting percentage. He's 34.4% on catch and shoot three-pointers, which you'd like to see be better, but it's at least an improvement for where it's been in past seasons. He is shooting a career high 33.7% from the field, from three, that is. So I feel like he's the odd man out. I feel like he would probably be the one that Oklahoma City would part with first. But, I just think that the roster construction of the Thunder here is very interesting, and I'm curious what direction they are going to choose to go moving forward here, because I just named the three you absolutely have to pay is SGA, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren. I would try and keep Lou Dort around as long as possible because he adds, this Oklahoma City Thunder team, as much as it does feel like they are a little bit susceptible in the paint, they're still fourth in the league during the regular season, at least, in defensive rating. And the way that they played this series, and granted, the Pelicans are sort of hindered from a health perspective because of the Zion situation, but the Pelicans didn't score over 50 points in a single half all series. So it's obviously 4 games, 8 halves. That is pretty unheard of in the NBA in 2024. And again, it's because of that switchability. It's because of the versatility. It's because of the IQ. I think that Mark Daigneault is also a tremendous coach from a scheming standpoint. So, I don't know. Thunder are just a very fun team here. And it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the postseason goes for them. Now, again, Pelicans. I'm sure we'll talk more about them in the offseason. I feel like they are going to be due for, I wouldn't necessarily say a panic move, but trying to shake things up, because it does feel like I believe in the foundation that's there. I'm the number one Herb Jones fan in the world, I think, but they have some guys that I feel like are very promising. I feel like there's the likes of a Trey Murphy, who probably can do more from an offensive perspective if he's given a bigger role, but he just plays so similar to Brandon Ingram, where if you go back to the play-in tournament, that's why I sort of understood why, along with the fact that Ingram was still sort of coming back from that injury, that during the fourth quarter run where the Pelicans, I still feel like, would have won that game if it weren't for Zion getting injured. They were doing so with Brandon Ingram on the bench and Trey Murphy sort of playing his spot on the court. So let me know what you feel about the futures of these two teams. I feel like they both have bright ones ahead. I think the Pelicans have a little bit of tweaking that they need to do before they have fully arrived. But that is all we have time for on this segment. We are going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back, I want to do a little exercise talking about the legacy of Kevin Durant, who has been facing a lot of scrutiny in these past couple days because of the Suns getting swept. So I have some thoughts on that. Stick with us, and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're headed into our final segment of the day, and I wanted to do a little something on Kevin Durant's legacy. As you know, the Suns were swept over the weekend by the Minnesota Timberwolves. It was, frankly, a pretty pathetic outing from the Suns, where it wasn't just that they got outplayed, but I thought that they got outworked, and they just never really had any sense of desperation. It felt like Suns fans sort of felt that as well. And, you know, there was a brief period during the regular season where it felt like, okay, maybe now they're all sort of starting to figure one another out and that they're coming together. They understand their roles. But even then, there were some glaring issues with the team. Depth was always an issue for them. That's why they made the series of moves that they did at the trade deadline. Ended up bringing in Royce O'Neal to really be, you know, that big bench piece. But they offloaded a couple other guys who, you know, weren't tremendous necessarily, but I also felt like they gave some solid minutes at time. Either way, though, you know, the bench was never in a great spot. The fact that they never had a legitimate point guard, and amidst all these sort of rumors about what's going to happen next with Frank Vogel as their head coach, he was, I believe this was his first season in Phoenix. Feel free to fact check me if that's not true, but that's why I also feel like it's kind of ridiculous, the idea of firing him after 1 year, as if there's anything he really could have changed, especially with the stories that are coming out that he sort of argued with the front office that they needed a legitimate point guard, and they never actually addressed that. So as a result, they were, and we've talked about this plenty of times on the show throughout the course of the year, they were just so reliant on their individual scorers to make stuff happen. And the shot making from specifically Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal. And this issue was baked into the fact that they were a horrendous fourth quarter team. They had the worst net rating in the NBA in the fourth quarter this season. Their offense just continually dried up. They were actually 10th in the NBA in the regular season in offensive rating as a whole, but they were last in the offensive rating in the fourth quarter, which drastically weighed them down. And it's because when these games got a little bit clunkier and sort of came down to these late game executions, it's just, you know, game slows down, and you would think that to some degree the Kevin Durant and the Devin Bookers specifically would be able to get theirs, but it gets tiring after a while, and we saw some of these instances. I believe the Chicago Bulls game is the one that really stood out to me, where Kevin Durant had that double clutch mid-range jump shot. There was a Kings comeback along in that same time period as well. I feel like I'm talking like January, February-ish that these games stuck out to me. But, you know, it was really difficult for them to time after time just lean on the backs of specifically those two players, because this was a bad Bradley Beal season. And I remember I just got into an argument, you know, a few weeks ago about one of my friends. Bradley Beal is not close to being an all-star player anymore, and that doesn't mean that he hasn't had a very solid career, but, you know, bringing him in, and I understand to some degree, you know, the fact that they got him for just about nothing, so the risk reward in that sense wasn't, you know, it wasn't like they were moving off of anything. But the risk is now that you are stuck with a Bradley Beal who's going to be making over $50 million per year for each of the next 3 seasons. And the way that Game 4 ended was absolutely terrible. He was really bad down the stretch of that game. And the Suns team was just a mess generally. And ultimately, now the Suns get worked in this series, and it falls a lot on the shoulders of Kevin Durant, who has now been swept in the first round twice since leaving the Warriors. And, you know, a lot of questions sort of start to arise about what is Kevin Durant's legacy going to look like moving forward. I think that Shannon Sharp had a quote. Now, this could have been aggregated, so if there's more of a big picture here, I apologize, but he said along the lines that Kevin Durant's going to be remembered for getting swept in the first round. And I just think that that is a ridiculous statement, because his legacy is not going to be looked at in the same light that it deserves because of how good of a player he is. But when he made that decision to join the Golden State Warriors in 2016, I think was the offseason that he joined there following the Cavs comeback. That was the 2016 finals, so I believe it was 2016 that Kevin Durant decided to sign with the Warriors. Once he did that, nobody was going to ever really give him the respect that he deserved unless he was able to rattle off post-Warriors championships, because a lot of people don't even give him credit for winning the finals those 2 years he was there. He would have won 3 finals if it weren't for the fact that he and Klay Thompson both got injured in 2019. But this is one of the most gifted individual players we have ever seen, at least from my perspective. I think he's the best pure scorer I have ever seen. Now, that list of, again, I understand reference-wise, maybe if you are an older fan, you're going to be pissed at me for saying this, but at least from, the 21st century when I've been watching the NBA, it is Kevin Durant, LeBron's on the list, of course, Steph Curry's on the list, Kobe Bryant's on the list. I'd maybe even sneak in Kyrie Irving there, but Durant is, the player who can do it all, where he obviously knows how to pick his spots in the mid-range, one of the best mid-range shooters of all time. With his length, he can get to the rim. With the size that he plays at, being able to shoot outside the way he does, he is the 8th all-time leading scorer. Out of the top 50 scorers of all time, only Steph Curry has a higher true shooting percentage than Kevin Durant. I just decided to go to the first page of the NBA.com and scroll down to the whole first page, which has 50. I bet if I continued my search there, it would still be hard to find anybody who shot better than he did. We know how great of a scorer he is, 4-time scoring champ, 10-time All-NBA, 14-time All-Star, 2-time Finals MVP in 2013-14. You know all of the accolades anyways, so there's not really much point in me diving into these specifically. But generally here with Kevin Durant, I understand that the look of him joining the team that just came back against him in the prior playoffs 3-1 is not a good look. And I hated Kevin Durant, for sports hated him for a handful of years following that, because frankly he did kind of ruin the NBA for a bit there, where no matter how good any other team was, it was a foregone conclusion that the Warriors were going to win the finals as long as they were healthy, and that's exactly how it played out during his 3 years there. But ultimately, that decision just sort of did him in so wrong, even though the fact that from a, basketball perspective, there was an opportunity, the way that the cap space was jumping in that off season anyways, he chose to go to basketball heaven, where it was the best possible situation for him from a basketball perspective, and he decided to do so, and he was the best player on those teams, as good as Steph Curry is. And, he's also up there in terms of, Hall of Fame talents undoubtedly, but at least in those seasons that Kevin Durant was with Steph Curry, he was the better player. And, I feel like if in life, all of us would prefer to be in the best possible work situation that brings us joy, and that's what Kevin Durant did. Now, it was a little bit rocky at times. Obviously, the Draymond Green situation wasn't ideal for him, but he then left that incredible situation in Golden State because of Draymond Green some, but also because he knew he was never going to get the respect he deserved if he stuck it out in Golden State. So if he did re-sign with the Warriors and they did win another 2, 3, 4 finals, then still nobody would give him any credit for that. And Obviously, he ends up tearing his Achilles in the 2019 finals, so he would have been out for the 1920 season anyways. He would have come back in 2021, and it would have been a different picture. He would have been 32 years old at that point. He wouldn't have been quite at the peak of his powers. But I just feel like Kevin Durant, the second he signed with the Warriors, in terms of how will his legacy be remembered, he sort of did himself in. Fair or unfair? I do lean that it is a little bit unfair, because I just feel like he doesn't get, the respect he deserves. But at the same time, we've seen situations in sports. It's basketball, but we've also seen it in football. And, sort of to the basketball example of it, we saw LeBron James kind of, for his own sake, have to leave Cleveland. I'm specifically referring to the second time. First time was totally deserved. The Cavs organization didn't do him any favors. Went to Miami, then came back to Cleveland, and by the end of that second Cleveland stint for LeBron, the GM, had tanked the team, asking them to give out all of these contracts to Tristan Thompson and to J.R. Smith, and Kyrie Irving was on his way out, and there was never enough help. They constantly had to make all of these different moves, so it was a constant cycle for them there. And in order for him to have a chance to continue winning, he had to move to LA. And I feel like there's a little bit of similarities in this case in terms of Kevin Durant. He went from hitching his wagon to Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, two of the Hall of Fame players. Steph Curry, one of the best players of all time and one of the best teammates of all time. And he decided to hitch his wagon to a Kyrie Irving and James Harden, where neither of them, and it's been great to see the resurgence of Kyrie in terms of actually focusing on the game and being committed to the team, and actually, being healthy for another fact as well. But, those were the partners that Kevin Durant chose to go into business with, and it was a bad business decision. And then the ask out to Phoenix, still also, I understand wanting to get out of that Phoenix situation, especially because of the fact that Kyrie had just asked out, and I feel like Kevin Durant probably could have stuck it out and tried to make it work a little bit better, but it was such a tumultuous run there in Brooklyn anyways that I can understand it to some degree. But then to say, basically, I don't want this to be a free market. I want to go to Phoenix, and that's it. And the Suns ended up giving away all of their supplementary pieces in order to get him. And, now we're looking at this a year later, they make an additional Brad Beal trade, and they are just a mess. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out, because Durant, his legacy obviously isn't done just yet, but he's going to be 36 years old next season. I don't know what the Suns can really do, keeping everything to run it back and be a success story next year. I feel like either Durant is probably going to be the one to get moved. Everybody says just trade Brad Beal, but no other team wants Brad Beal. And the Suns don't have any draft capital to sort of, sweeten the deal and try and make it easier to take on that type of money. But I don't know. I just feel like generally here with the Suns, they are a little bit in purgatory, and I would assume that it's going to be a Durant trade as opposed to a Booker trade. Now, they could definitely get more value for Booker, but that's kind of all they have going for them in the near future, unless they feel like Booker's going to want his way out. And in that case, is Durant even going to still want to be there either? So who knows what goes on there. I will say this, the fact that Durant was so sort of picky about his situation there in Phoenix and said that he didn't really feel like he was being utilized right and how his fit was. Durant's supposed to be a player that you can sort of plug into any system and he's going to be an effective offensive player. And it's not like he wasn't an effective offensive player this season. He still averaged 27 points per game on 52-41 shooting splits, which is really impressive. But at the same time, I don't know, the complaining after the fact, I don't feel like is a great look for him either. But definitely let me know in the comments section how you feel about Kevin Durant's legacy. That is all the time we have, though, for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on socials for more exclusive content as well. But on that note, that is all we have for today. We will be back 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, Eastern Time. We will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.